My father left me $500,000 in his will, but there was one toxic condition attached, written by my mother. To get the money, she had to approve of the man I married. So, 2 years later, I stood in a dusty courthouse, said I do to the one man she would despise, and chose to be happy instead of rich. I never regretted it. Until the day I found myself in a hospital, forced to confront her with the truth. Hey everyone, it's Eleanor. My mother, Estelle Beaumont, has always had a way with words, not the warm, comforting kind, but the kind that are sharp, perfectly aimed, and leave a mark you can't see. A few years ago, I found myself sitting in a sterile, white room at Massachusetts General Hospital, the rhythmic beep of her heart monitor counting out the seconds of my life-altering lie. She was pale, diminished by the web of tubes and wires, but her eyes were as critical as ever. She looked at my single chair beside her bed, then at the empty space around us, and a thin, knowing smile touched her lips. "Well, Eleanor," she said, her voice a dry whisper. "At least you're not alone." She gestured towards a passing doctor. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that my husband, my rock, my entire world for the last 3 years was standing just on the other side of that door. His knuckles probably white from gripping his phone, waiting for any news from me. My world was split in two by that single, beige hospital door. That moment was the culmination of a secret I had guarded with every fiber of my being. A secret that had forced me to live a double life, to build a fortress of lies around the people I loved most. A secret that had already cost me a $500,000 inheritance and was about to cost me so much more. This is the story of how a choice made out of love led to an impossible standoff in a hospital room, and how the life I built in the shadows finally, violently, came into the light. Before I tell you how it all began, I'd love to feel a little less alone myself. Let me know what city you're watching from in the comments below. To understand how I got there, you have to understand the gilded cage I was born into. That cage had a name. Beacon Hill. A historic, gaslit neighborhood in Boston where your family name mattered more than your happiness, and appearances were the highest form of currency. The air in our townhouse always smelled of lemon polish and old money, a scent I've come to associate with quiet, suffocating pressure. My father, Richard, was the one who always left the door to that cage slightly ajar. He was the quiet wink across the dinner table when my mother would critique my posture, the one who'd slip me $20 and tell me to go buy the book she knew I wanted instead of the socially advantageous tennis lessons. When a sudden heart attack took him from us my junior year of college, that door didn't just close, it was bolted shut. And my mother, Estelle, was the one holding the key. I remember sitting in our family's estate lawyer's office a week later, the leather of the chair sticking to my black dress. My mother was a portrait of stoic grief, her sorrow as impeccably tailored as her suit. And then, the lawyer cleared his throat and read the clause. My father had left me a trust fund, a generous one, valued at $500,000. I felt a rush of love and gratitude, until the next words hit me like ice water. The trust was conditional. To inherit, I had to marry a man of appropriate social standing, with the marriage being personally and finally approved by her before my 36th birthday. It wasn't a gift, it was a golden leash. My future, neatly packaged and priced. My mother had found a way to institutionalize her control, using my father's legacy as the ink. It's a strange feeling, isn't it, when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally put a price tag on your future? In that moment, listening to the legal jargon that defined my cage, I knew I couldn't just walk away from her. I had to run. And run, I did. Not to New York or Washington, D.C., where my mother's social web could still reach me with a single phone call. I ran over 1,900 miles south to a place that felt like the antithesis of everything she stood for. Austin, Texas. If Boston was cold marble, hushed libraries, and conversations spoken in code, Austin was hot pavement, sprawling oak trees, and the constant, rebellious thrum of live music pouring from every doorway. It was a city that celebrated being different, proudly flying the banner of "Keep Austin Weird." To my mother, it was essentially a foreign country, devoid of culture and, more importantly, devoid of the right people. I broke the news to her after I'd been accepted into the Master of Architecture program at the University of Texas. She went silent on the phone for a long, heavy moment. I could practically hear her calculating the social cost of my decision. Architecture? She finally said, the disappointment coating every syllable like expensive venom. Eleanor, what will you possibly build in Austin? Barbecue shacks? She didn't yell. Estelle Beaumont never yells, she dismisses. She has a surgeon's ability to find your biggest dream and, with one precise incision, make it feel small and foolish. But her disapproval was the fuel I needed. Packing my bags felt like shedding a skin I had been trapped in for 24 years. The flight itself was the first time I felt I could draw a full breath without my ribs constricting. Landing in that humid, vibrant Texas air was like stepping into a different version of my own life. For the first time, I wasn't an heir to a conditional trust fund or a disappointment to the Beaumont name. I was just Eleanor, a student with a sketchbook and a future that was completely unwritten. It's terrifying to start over, but there's also a powerful magic in a blank page, isn't there? I didn't know what my story would be, but I knew, finally, that I would be the one to write it. For 2 years, I poured myself into my new life. I fell in love with Austin's eccentric charm, its blistering 100-degree summers, and the profound freedom of anonymity. And then, in my final semester, while working on my thesis project, a redesign for a historic, slightly rundown music venue on South Congress Avenue, I met Leo Sullivan. He wasn't part of the architectural team. He was just there, a musician who played the venue regularly, giving unsolicited but brilliant advice on acoustics to my professor. He had this unruly dark hair that he was always pushing out of his eyes, a guitar case covered in faded band stickers, and a smile that was so genuine it felt like a foreign language after a lifetime of my mother's polite, calculated expressions. He never asked what my father did for a living or what neighborhood I grew up in. Instead, he asked what I loved about the curve of a roofline, what stories I thought the old brick walls could tell if they could talk. He saw the world not as a series of social ladders to be climbed, but as a collection of beautiful, interesting things to be explored. The men my mother paraded before me back in Boston were polished resumes in human form, all Ivy League degrees, and predictable futures in finance or law. Leo was building a life, not a portfolio. My mother would have taken one look at his worn-out jeans and his passion for something as financially unstable as music and dismissed him with a single, icy glance. Our first date was at a food truck park, under a string of twinkling lights, and we talked for hours. He told me about his dream of recording an album. I told him about my dream of designing buildings that felt like they belonged to the sky. With Leo, it was easy. For the first time, I felt truly seen, not as an extension of my family, but as myself. I was falling deeply in love, and it felt as natural as breathing. I knew, even then, that this simple, beautiful happiness was a declaration of war against my old life. I just didn't know how soon the first battle would be. That first battle arrived via a first-class ticket from Boston. A year into my relationship with Leo, my mother announced she was coming to visit. She called it a long-overdue trip to see my daughter's new life, but I knew what it was, an inspection. From the moment she stepped out of the air-conditioned town car into the humid Texas air, her disapproval was a tangible thing, like a third person in the room. She surveyed my small but charming Zilker Park apartment as if it were a crime scene, her eyes cataloging every perceived flaw. The dinner I nervously arranged for her to meet Leo was even worse. She didn't just ask him questions, she cross-examined him under the guise of polite interest. "So, Leo," she began, her fork poised elegantly. "What's the 5-year plan for this? Music endeavor? Does one get a 401 cake with that?" Leo, bless his heart, was patient and kind, explaining his work with a passion that only seemed to irritate her more. But the real ambush came the next night. "Darling, a little surprise," she announced over the phone. "Carter Thorne is in town for a legal conference. His mother told me, and I insisted he join us for dinner." Carter was the son of her charity committee co-chair, a freshly minted Boston lawyer with a jawline as rigid as his future prospects. The entire dinner was a torturous performance, Estelle would ask Carter about a recent multi-million-dollar merger he'd worked on, then turn to Leo and ask if he'd written any catchy jingles lately. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. I watched the light in Leo's eyes dim with each passive-aggressive blow, and a cold fury started to build in my chest. It's one thing to have a parent who disapproves, but have you ever had someone actively try to sabotage your happiness right in front of your eyes? That night, I knew this wasn't just about her not liking my boyfriend. This was about winning, and she was willing to burn my world down to do it. The fury I felt after she left simmered for days. I was naive enough to think that was the worst of it, that she had fired her best shot and failed. I was wrong. The worst came a week later, via a phone call from her Boston study, a room so quiet and orderly you could hear the ice clinking in her afternoon drink from 2,000 miles away. She didn't start with yelling, her tactics were always more refined than that. She began with her signature tone of weary disappointment, a weapon she had sharpened over my entire lifetime. She spoke of the legacy of the Beaumont and Monroe families, of my duty, of the brilliant future my father had always envisioned for me. And then, as I knew she would, she brought up the will, the trust, Eleanor, she said, her voice turning cold and pragmatic, as if discussing a stock portfolio. It's there for your security. A safety net. Your father wanted you to have a stable life. I have a good life, Mom. I shot back, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. Leo makes me happy. I heard her sigh, a sound of theatrical exhaustion she had perfected. Happiness doesn't pay a mortgage, darling. Passion doesn't fund a child's Ivy League education. And then she laid her cards on the table, a royal flush meant to obliterate whatever meager hand I was holding. So, it's time to be an adult. You can have this musician and his little songs in your dusty little city. You can have a life of artistic struggle, and that's your right. Or, you can come home. You can have your family, the future you were raised for, and the $500,000 your father left for you. The choice is yours, Eleanor. Him or us. The line went quiet, but her words screamed in my ear. She had finally put a price on my obedience. The only question left was what I was willing to pay for my freedom. I hung up the phone, and the silence in my small Austin apartment was deafening. For a few days, I was paralyzed by the sheer weight of her ultimatum. It was never really about the money itself. It was about the finality of it. My mother had drawn a line in the sand, and crossing it meant exiling myself from the only family I had ever known. It was a choice between my past and my future, and it felt like a betrayal either way. The deciding moment came that weekend. Leo found me on the balcony, looking through old family photos and crying silently. He didn't ask what was wrong or pressure me for a decision. He just sat down beside me, took my hand, and said, "Whatever you choose, I'm with you. Even if you choose to walk away from me, I'll understand. I just want you to be happy." In that instant, the choice became blindingly clear. My mother's love was a contract, full of clauses and conditions. Leo's love was a gift, given freely. There was no contest. The following Tuesday, we drove down to the Travis County Courthouse. There was no white dress, no string quartet, no ice sculpture of a swan. It was just us, in a sun-drenched, slightly dusty room that smelled of old paper, with his two scruffy bandmates as our witnesses. As we said our simple vows, I felt a weight I didn't even know I was carrying lift from my shoulders. With my signature on that marriage certificate, I was actively renouncing the $500,000. I was choosing this man, this life, this freedom. It was the most rebellious and liberating act of my life, trading a fortune for authenticity. Have you ever had to make a choice that you knew was right for your soul, even though it meant disappointing everyone else? It's a lonely, but incredibly powerful moment. I had my husband and I had my integrity. Now I just had to figure out how to live with the secret. And so began the great performance of my life. For 3 years, I existed as two different women, my identity split by a 1,900-mile firewall of carefully constructed lies. There was the Eleanor in Austin, a wife, an architect, and eventually, a mother. Then there was the Eleanor my family knew. the perpetually single, career-focused daughter of Estelle Beaumont. The logistics were exhausting. For my weekly phone calls with my mother, I would lock myself in our bedroom, praying Leo's band practice wouldn't start early or that the baby monitor would stay silent. For my semi-annual trips back to Boston, I traveled alone. Each time, I'd slip my simple gold wedding band off my finger and onto a chain around my neck, where it would lie cold against my skin, a secret, heavy reminder of the life I couldn't share. When my mother made her rare visits to Austin, it was a full-blown military operation. Leo would pack a bag and stay with his drummer for the weekend. I would have to meticulously de-Leo our entire house, hiding his clothes, his books, his guitar from its stand in the corner, his very existence. It felt like I was methodically erasing my own happiness for her benefit. Then, 2 years in, our daughter Sophie was born. She was 7 pounds and 2 ounces of pure, unadulterated love, with Leo's dark hair and my green eyes. Holding her for the first time, my heart broke in two. Half of me was filled with this fierce, primal joy. The other half was grieving for the grandmother my daughter would never know. The lies became heavier, more dangerous. A baby's cry in the background of a phone call had to be explained away as the neighbor's TV. The dark circles under my eyes were from a demanding project at work, not from a 3 a.m. feeding. The strain was immense, a constant, low-grade panic that I would make a mistake. Our beautiful life wasn't a secret because we were ashamed of it. It was a secret because I was terrified of my mother's power to destroy it. The thing about a house of cards is that it can't stand forever. All it takes is one unexpected gust of wind, one tremor in the foundation, and everything you've so carefully balanced comes crashing down. My tremor came on a sunny Saturday afternoon in October, 3 years after my wedding. Sophie, who was now a bubbly, chattering toddler, was chasing butterflies in our small backyard. Leo was on the porch, working on a new melody on his acoustic guitar, the gentle notes mingling with our daughter's laughter. The air smelled like cut grass and happiness. It was a perfect, ordinary moment, the kind of priceless moment I had sacrificed $500,000 for. And then my phone rang. The screen lit up with a name I rarely saw. Uncle Walter. A cold, heavy knot of dread immediately formed in the pit of my stomach. My uncle, my dad's gentle younger brother, was the family peacemaker. He never called unless it was an emergency. I stepped inside and answered, my heart already pounding. His strained voice cut straight through the beautiful afternoon. "Eleanor," he said, with no preamble. "It's your mother. She collapsed during a charity luncheon. They think it was a heart attack. She's stable, but she's at Mass General. You need to come home." The world tilted on its axis. In that single instant, all the anger, the resentment, the years of building walls, it all dissolved into a primal, terrifying fear for my mother's life. And right behind that fear was a second, colder wave of panic. My secret. The lies. What would I do with Sophie? How could I possibly navigate this crisis without everything unraveling? Leo saw the look on my face, put down his guitar, and was by my side in a second. Before I could even begin to explain the logistical nightmare, he just said, "Go. I've got Sophie. Don't worry about anything here. Just go." I was on a flight to Boston within 3 hours, leaving my entire beautiful, secret world behind to fly straight into the storm I had spent 3 years trying to avoid. The flight felt like a time machine, hurtling me backward into a life I no longer recognized as my own. Logan Airport was gray and chilly, a stark, unwelcome contrast to the sunny Austin I'd left behind just hours before. At Massachusetts General, the scent of antiseptic and anxiety hit me like a physical blow. It's the universal smell of crisis, a smell that instantly transports you to the worst moments of your life. My Uncle Walter met me in the cardiac wing, his usually cheerful face etched with deep lines of worry. He gave me a hug that felt like he was trying to hold himself together. "She's a fighter, Ellie," he said, using my childhood nickname, which made a lump form in my throat. "The doctors are optimistic. She's been asking for you." The guilt was immediate, sharp, and unwelcome. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door to her private room. And for a single, fleeting moment, my heart ached with nothing but pure, uncomplicated love. She looked so small in that big hospital bed, a web of wires and tubes tethering her to the beeping machines that were now the soundtrack of our family's panic. Her perfectly coiffed silver hair was slightly askew, her face pale and drawn without its usual mask of makeup. In that moment, she wasn't the tyrant who had issued ultimatums. She was just my mother, fragile. Then she opened her eyes, and the illusion shattered. She looked me up and down, a slow, critical scan from my shoes to my hair. Her voice was weak, raspy, but the words were pure Estelle. "Eleanor," she breathed. "Good heavens, you look exhausted. That long flight does nothing for your complexion." "No, I'm so glad you're here." "No, I was so scared." "Just a critique." Just like always. We spent the next hour walking on eggshells, talking about everything and nothing: her doctors, the terrible hospital food, a leaky faucet at the Beacon Hill house. It's an incredibly difficult thing, isn't it, to try and care for a parent when your relationship itself feels wounded. All I could think about was the man in Austin, my husband, who was probably pacing the floors, waiting for my call. For the next 2 days, I lived in that beige-colored room, caught in a time loop of nurses checking vital signs and conversations that were heavy with everything we weren't saying. I was so focused on managing my mother, on playing the part of the dutiful, single daughter, that I didn't see the inevitable collision coming until it was already happening. On the third morning, I stumbled out into the hallway to get a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt plastic, my eyes gritty from sleeping in a vinyl armchair. And then I saw him. Leaning against the wall at the far end of the corridor, looking rumpled and exhausted but so wonderfully real, was Leo. My husband. He'd taken the first red-eye flight out of Austin. He said he couldn't stand the thought of me going through this alone. My heart both soared with love and plummeted with sheer, abject terror. It was the most romantic gesture, and the most reckless. "You can't be here," I whispered, rushing over to him, trying to shield him with my body. "What if she sees you?" "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice firm and low. "I'll stay in the family lounge down the hall. You don't have to do this by yourself." He reached for my hand just as my Uncle Walter rounded the corner, holding 2 cups of tea. My uncle stopped dead in his tracks. He looked at Leo's hand holding mine, then at the sheer panic on my face, and then back at Leo. He took in the entire, unspoken story in a single, silent glance. A slow, sad smile touched his lips. He walked over, put a hand on my shoulder, and said, so quietly it was almost a breath, "He's a good man to come all this way for you, Ellie." It was a whisper of acceptance, a secret shared between us. But the door to my mother's room hadn't been fully latched. It was open, just a crack. And from inside, a frail voice, suddenly sharp with suspicion, cut through the hallway's quiet hum. "Walter, who is out there? Who came for Eleanor?" We all froze. The house of cards was falling. Time seemed to freeze in that hospital hallway. My uncle's face was pale with regret for his innocent comment, while Leo looked like he was ready to face a firing squad for me. I knew there was no more running, no more hiding. Taking a steadying breath, I pushed the door fully open and walked back in to face the consequences. My mother had managed to push herself up slightly against the pillows. Her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing, were locked on my face. They weren't asking a question anymore. They were demanding an answer. "Who is he, Eleanor?" she repeated, her voice thin but laced with steel. So I told her. The words came out not in a frantic rush, but in a slow, tired confession that felt like it was being pulled from the depths of my soul. "His name is Leo Sullivan," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "He is my husband. We have been married for 3 years." I watched her process that, the flicker of shock in her eyes quickly extinguished and replaced by something hard and cold. I kept going, knowing I had to lay all the cards on the table at once. "And we have a daughter. Her name is Sophie. She's almost 3. You have a granddaughter, Mom." I let that sink in before delivering the final, crucial piece of the confession. I knew what the will stipulated. I chose him anyway. I had braced myself for screaming, for crying, for a dramatic outburst worthy of her charity galas. What I received was far worse. Absolute, bone-chilling silence. A cold, heavy silence that sucked all the air out of the room, punctuated only by the steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. Her face became a perfect, unreadable mask of ice. After what felt like an eternity, she turned her head slightly and looked at the wall just past my shoulder. Her voice, when it came, was flat and devoid of all emotion. "I see," she said. "I find that I am very tired now. I need you to leave." It was a dismissal so complete, so absolute, it felt like she had erased me from existence. I stumbled out of that room, feeling hollowed out, like a ghost in my own life. Leo was there instantly, wrapping his arms around me as I started to shake uncontrollably, holding me together when I felt like I was about to shatter into a million pieces. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. He just held me. My Uncle Walter stood a few feet away, his face a mask of sorrow and a quiet, simmering anger directed not at me, but at the closed door of my mother's room. "Come on," he said, his voice firm but gentle, cutting through my daze. "You're not staying here. I'll drive you wherever you need to go." He led us out of the cardiac wing, away from that cold, quiet room that now felt like a tomb. We didn't speak until we were in the sterile silence of the hospital parking garage, the scent of concrete and exhaust fumes a strange comfort after the antiseptic air upstairs. He turned to me before we got in the car, his eyes searching mine. "Ellie," he started, his voice thick with emotion. "I need you to listen to me. What your mother is doing is wrong. It's cruel, and I know for a fact it is not what your father would have wanted." He took a shaky breath. "Your dad, he adored your mother, but her obsession with status, with what the right people thought, it wore on him. All he ever wanted was for you to be happy, genuinely happy. Not society page happy." He glanced at Leo with respect. "That money," he continued, shaking his head, "he would be horrified to know she was using it as a weapon. He would have loved your passion, and he would have loved that you found a man who shares it. He would be so incredibly proud of you." Hearing those words, hearing my father's spirit channeled through his kind-hearted brother was like the first rain after a devastating drought. It didn't fix the wound, but it was a soothing balm. Sometimes, family isn't a crowd, but just one person standing in your corner that makes all the difference. Is there someone in your family who has been that rock for you? In that cold garage, my uncle gave me back a piece of my father, and a reason to believe I wasn't entirely alone. Returning to Austin was like surfacing for air after being held underwater. I hugged Sophie so tightly she squealed, and I fell into Leo's arms, my safe harbor. For a few weeks, I threw myself back into my real life, into the warmth and the light, trying to pretend the gaping wound my mother had torn open would just heal on its own. But a shadow followed me from Boston. It was the silence. Weeks turned into a month. I'd catch myself checking my phone, my email, a conditioned reflex from a lifetime of seeking her approval. But there was nothing. Just a vast, cold silence from the other side of the country, a silence that felt heavier and more final than any angry words could have been. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, a package arrived. A crisp, brown box with a shipping label from Beacon Hill. My mother's elegant, sharp handwriting was unmistakable. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was terrified to open it. Was it a box of my childhood belongings, a final, symbolic act of disownment? Was it a scathing, multi-page letter detailing all of my failures? I let the box sit on my kitchen counter for a whole day before I finally found the courage to slice through the tape. Inside, there was no letter, no angry words. Just a single object, wrapped carefully in white tissue paper, a heavy, worn, leather-bound photo album. I recognized it instantly. It wasn't one of my mother's curated books of perfect holiday portraits where we all looked like smiling mannequins. This was my dad's album, the one he'd made himself, full of candid, goofy, imperfect snapshots, me with chocolate all over my face. Him patiently teaching me how to ride my bike, his hands steady on the seat. A blurry photo of us on his shoulders at a 4th of July parade. In every single picture, the look on his face when he looked at me was one of pure, uncomplicated adoration. Tucked inside the front cover was a small, cream-colored note card. On it, in my mother's perfect script, were 7 words. No greeting, no signature, just, "He would have wanted you to have this." And I just sat on my kitchen floor and cried. It wasn't an apology, but it was an admission. It was the first crack in the ice. That photo album became a fragile bridge across a vast, silent canyon. A week later, my hands shaking, I called her. The conversation was painfully awkward, a minefield of unspoken words. We didn't talk about the hospital. We didn't talk about the fight. I just said, "Thank you for the album. It means a lot to me." And after a pause, she simply replied, "You're welcome." It wasn't much, but it was a start. Those stilted phone calls became a weekly ritual. At first, we stuck to safe, superficial topics: the weather in Boston, a new building project I was working on. Then, gradually, she started asking about Sophie. "Does she have your eyes?" she asked one Sunday, her voice hesitant, almost shy. I started sending her pictures, then short videos of Sophie finger painting or chasing our dog in the yard. I was letting her into our world, but only an inch at a time, on my terms. 3 months later, she asked if she could visit for Sophie's 3rd birthday. Leo and I discussed it for hours. We agreed, but we knew this visit had to be different. This time, she would be a guest in our home, our life. Her arrival was tense. She was civil to Leo, a stiff, formal politeness that was its own kind of armor. But then Sophie, who has no concept of old wounds or family drama, ran up and handed her a slightly crumpled drawing of a butterfly. And I saw something in my mother's face I hadn't seen in years, a flicker of unguarded, genuine emotion. The visit wasn't perfect. At one point, she made a critical comment about our choice of preschool. The old me would have withered. The new me simply said, calmly, "We're very happy with it, Mom." She was taken aback, but she just nodded and dropped the subject. It was a tiny moment, but it was everything. It was me setting a boundary, and her, for the first time, respecting it. Our relationship wasn't fixed, but it was being rebuilt, brick by brick, on a new and far more honest foundation. So that's where we are today. Our life isn't a perfect, happily ever after postcard from a movie. The relationship with my mother is a constant work in progress. It's a slow, deliberate dance of finding new footing on what was once broken ground. She visits Austin a few times a year now. She and Leo have what I'd call a quiet, respectful truce. He will never forget how she treated him, but he sees how much I need this, and he is a kind man. More importantly, I see my mother trying. I see her on the floor, playing with Sophie, a genuine, unguarded smile on her face, and I see a glimpse of the family I always dreamed we could be. Through this long and painful journey, I've learned that family isn't just about blood or obligation, it's about choice. It's about who respects you, who honors your truth, and who chooses to love you, not a version of you they've invented. Leo and Sophie are my primary family, the one I built. My mother is learning how to be a part of that family, on our terms. I learned about forgiveness, too. Not the easy kind, but the hard kind, realizing that forgiveness isn't about excusing someone's actions, but about releasing yourself from the hope that the past could have been any different. There was a form of quiet justice in all of this. My mother didn't face some dramatic, cosmic retribution. Her consequence was simply the silent, irreversible fact that she missed 3 years of her only granddaughter's life. She missed the first steps, the first words, the first birthday party. That is a price that no amount of money can ever repay. But the most important lesson was for me. My worth was never defined by my mother's approval or a $500,000 trust fund. It was defined by my own courage to choose happiness. What lesson from this story resonated with you the most? Share it in the comments below. And if my journey has meant something to you, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for listening. Remember, sometimes the hardest choices are the only ones that can finally set you free.